Olá, boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon. We are going to start again the discussions of the handbook to the strengthness of budget credibility. I'm going to pass the floor. Thank you, Dr. Rodrigo. Good afternoon. Following the debates of the draft of the handbook, in the morning we had some presentations of the TCU team that is with this elaboration of this UN project. They present some aspects of the draft. In the afternoon, in this part, we are programming to have an open debate. So the idea is the exposition of understandings and suggestions, impressions, and perceptions about the subject, budget credibility, and open debate. So we want to let you comfortable of the participants to this debate. I would like to start asking Arancha and Alexandre if you want to initiate, bring some theme, make some remarks on this debate.
I would like to, I'm sorry, I will speak in English, but I understand Portuguese. So I think the session during the morning was really rich, and it raised some of the issues that we have been discussing during the different meetings of the group of resource experts. There were some relevant comments in the morning regarding the need of being inclusive and considering the different context, institutional context in countries, difference in terms also of the budget process, the public financial management system, but also the difference across supreme audit institutions in terms of their mandates, their capacities, the resources available, the type of audit approaches they are using for their work related to budget issues. So those are considerations that we have been discussing with the group during the last year after we started the working on the handbook. So I think that's a very relevant issue, and we have tried to incorporate some of that or considering that variation in some of the early chapters, but of course it would also be clear throughout the different chapters on the different audit practices as they will provide specific guidance, and we would like to also make sure that the guidance is provided in a way that can be tailored to supreme audit institutions with different capacities and resources. So the examples provided could be in a range or an incremental way. So supreme audit institutions at different levels in terms of the work they do related to the budget can relate to that to those practices and examples. So I think that's an important point that was raised in the morning. I think both Nehemias and Roberto also raised some relevant issues for our discussions that we also spent a lot of time discussing within the group during the last review meeting that we had in June, a couple of weeks ago. So one of the issues, of course, is related to the concept of budget credibility and how we accommodate for a more narrow understanding of the concept, just focus on budget deviations. But also, and I think that was clear since the first meeting we had in May 2021, that for supreme audit institutions is very relevant to consider a wider understanding of the concept of credibility, which of course incorporates the performance and the effectiveness, the impact of budget deviations or credibility challenges and risks in terms of service delivery and the delivery of goods. I think that was raised since the first meeting we had, and we have been working with the group to try to identify some of the different dimensions of the concept that may be relevant for Supreme Audit institutions and relate those dimensions also to the different types of audit practices, and coming also with relevant examples. Another critical issue which was also raised in the morning was regarding having these kind of two different approaches in terms of audits that focus specifically on budget credibility, where budget credibility is the focus, the objective of your audit, and you have specific audit questions on budget credibility, but also how you can integrate or incorporate the issue of budget credibility in other audits, where the main objective of the audit is not budget credibility itself, but whether you can relate some of the findings to budget credibility issues that are relevant in the country context. And we have been, I think there was an agreement within the group of resource experts that we should try to consider both options and try also to come with relevant examples to illustrate both. So I think that was also discussed and raised in the morning. Something we also have been discussing is more in terms of the style or the type of handbook that we would like to have at the end. I think also in the morning we heard comments about make it like brief, practical, clear, and those are considerations we have been discussing also with the group, how to make use of tables, graphs, infographics, be quite concise in terms of the writing, to make sure that in all the chapters we have some theoretical considerations, issues related to the audit approach that is going to be illustrated, or the type of audit work, but also having very clear and practical guidance for conducting that kind of work. We have also been discussing with the group in terms of the final product of the handbook, whether we would like to have a more traditional handbook, like in a PDF document, or whether we want to explore a more interactive model to be able to present the contents, something that is more friendly for auditors and also other stakeholders that may be interested in the handbook. We have had also multiple discussions in terms of the structure of the handbook, and as we also mentioned in the morning, the need to have some strong theoretical chapters, the conceptual framework in the early chapters of the handbook, and then illustrate with 4 chapters in a very practical way how it translates into audit work. And also pay particular attention to the formulation of recommendations and the monitoring and follow-up of recommendations related to audit, to budget credibility. I think that's an important chapter, but also one chapter in which one of the challenges we have faced is in the last year, Supreme Audit institutions have made a lot of progress in terms of strengthening the recommendations, in terms of strengthening their monitoring systems and the follow-up to audit recommendations. But many of the examples we have do not necessarily relate to audits on budget issues, and particularly also in the audits of the state budget, annual audits of the state budget or the year-end accounts. So I think that would be one of the challenges in terms of how to illustrate, how to formulate better recommendations, as Roberto mentioned in the morning, and also try to provide some examples of how existing monitoring systems of recommendations and follow-up systems, and also collaboration with other stakeholders may also help and contribute to strengthen budget credibility in the countries. Let me see. I have a few. I think those were some of the most critical issues that we discussed in the morning, and which are really closely aligned with the discussions we have had with the group. I would like to highlight also that was mentioned is that we are really excited about the handbook, but also really happy with the commitment and the enthusiasm and dedication of all the resource experts that are participating in the development of the materials, including the team from TCU. And it has been really a very good experience also for both for IBP and for us in UNDESA to be able to bring together this group of experts from really strong supreme audit institutions in different countries and regions and find those common challenges and issues of interest to everyone, and also this desire to make a product that can be valuable for the INTOSAI community. And in that regard, maybe a last point is also in terms of what will happen when the handbook is produced. Hopefully, it will be launched, as I said, in the morning early next year, around March or April next year. And of course, as I said, we would like to have it translated into different languages to make it also be able to disseminate it more widely and to be able to be used by supreme audit institutions in different regions. But of course, we have also been discussing with the group the need to also refine and update the materials of the handbook, and the possibility of, after the first version of the handbook is final, and present it also whether there might be interest also in piloting, supporting some practical work to put the handbook in practice, and also based on that practical experience, being able to refine and improve the contents and the materials of the handbook. So we are thinking also in those next steps after the materials are finalized. And I think I will leave it here now. Alex can also say a few words on IBP's behalf, but of course, I mean, happy to also interact and discuss during the meeting, and if there are any questions, it would be really good to have that discussion. And we are really very looking forward to your inputs and comments. I think it's going to be very useful, not only for the team from TCU, but in general for all the different experts that are working on the handbook. So thank you.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon. I think that every point I agree with your evaluation, main points that you highlighted. For example, the definition of credibility, that was an aspect that we discussed, and this look contemplating all the visions, both the strict and the wide one, inside the concept that was talked about Dr. Julio, is an inclusive handbook, having the different mandates from the several countries has, and the different structures. I visit some in the last months, and they don't have the same structure, human resource as TCU. So from the recommendations of Dr. Julio, for example, a lot of practical fix, like the human resource to do an audit like that, they are very important informations. One question that Roberto mentioned, how to think this credibility works, linked to the different stages of the budget circle. It could be an example that could be done in every cycle stage. The audit of the annual accounts of the government is something very relevant. And the other two questions, Alessandro mentioned that we have global challenges, very important, related to tax restrictions, the public debt, because of the pandemic and the war, and also the demands, climate change, social demands, environment demands that are going to demand of the tax policy, management of the economic policy, and strengthens transparency, participation to attend the necessities that are put not only in Brazil but in the world. So I would like to say the political importance of the handbook and the opportunity of the CU as a leader of the community of the SAI that could give an excellent contribution. I'm sure that Minister Bruno are going to have another agendas, but this one is very important, the role of SAIs to deal with the public research, but mainly the public budget. Thinking about the national context, worldly and region, this handbook comes in a very opportune time. We were chatting at lunchtime and having some ideas to deliver this handbook and has from the international handbook one that can influence the court of audits in the municipalities and states, which will be a very interesting contribution for them to how can do their audits and another works related to the budget credibility in the level of state. Another thing that I want to mention is the meeting in November. We think to do an event during Entosai to discuss this theme with the entities that are here. And also, as Arancha said, we are available. We have a lot of information and research that I mentioned that IBP has conducting related to the credibility of the budget. And example with SAI of several countries, we are offering one of those, like IBP has a lot of contact and examples that could be interested to the handbook. We are available to that and contribute to TCU and the work team of the making of the handbook. Thank you, Arancha, Alexandre, Neemias and Roberto. Would you like to comment? Good afternoon, thank you. I brought here, with this recap made by Arancha and Alexandre, I brought some themes to try to call the reflection and animate the debate and the possibilities, provocations, and contributions. So I brought some themes that are highlighted in a very quick review through this work. The first one is their purpose is to support the external control to fiscalize the budget credibility. So these are the general line: control action, fiscalization, and credibility from the point of view of their credibility. This is the first approach that we have. In this sense, the relevant theme is to define the budget credibility. This is a debate, and through the day we already raised this question, so it's interesting to see the vision of everyone from their experience, how to characterize a belief budget from the trust execution that was proposed, or that's enough, or another dimensions to be considered, yes or no. Another theme. In the morning presentation, I was talking about the group that we work, that's recurrent audition, but there are another three groups of the handbook, and one is faced to PFM, as Roberto said, which is the budget system. So this group has a goal to evaluate the performance of budget management. So the bodies, the governmental structure that are a part of the following up of the budget, do they have a good performance? This is the question that we should approach the work. So one of the chapters about that. So our meeting with the colleagues that are engaged in this project, so we have this question that maybe explore this theme is reflect how we can evaluate this management system, how we can evaluate the performance of SOFI. So here, to us, we have an answer, but talking with several colleagues from several cultures, you have different answers. The control body to appreciate the proposal, the report of the budget, also part of budget structure, for example, another companies from government. So these structures that have accounts outside the budget spends, the performance evaluation should be considered, so it's a theme to be reflected. Another thing that Aranja mentioned is the issue about the diversity, how to put that on the handbook. It's a big challenge. So we have to make the text to be more general, or should we be very strict to the FS situation because of the different cultures and models? So it's a challenge. The planning issue, the external control should enter in which extension. I think we have the institutional path in a way, but in the international way, the discussion is very strong. In what measure the planning of the budget should be controlling. The SAIs, we have 2 chapters in the handbook related to the SAI work to do an analysis of risk of the budget. We have 2 levels in the handbook. One is the risk analysis in the level of the whole government, the wide, which are the risks of the government, and the other level are the risks of the budget execution to a politics in a wide way, in a body or in a politics. Do we have substantial difference? This difference of level are relevant, will bring relevant issues on that. And the risk analysis that had a very good debate was related to the income of budget or supplementary budget and their distribution, how people understand that the reference should not participate so much on this analysis, to enter so much in this analysis. Somebody understand that, yes, that has to be the politics, finances, the allocation, and then we enter in a question that it's ours, which is the amend mechanism to the or supplementary law, budget law. Then we are going to have reflection if the resource come by amend or not. So this kind of analysis, the nature of the public finances should be verified by the audit. It's interesting to be approached, seeing the budget credibility. And from the work itself, in the practical way, in which measure we want to detail, to plan and to execute the work. We have a draft of the planning metrics. Is this is desirable? It's good to have it, or it could stop the handbook. What's the people opinion? And the execution, how the execution should be details or with widely mentioned. And the last chapter that talks about the implementation of recommendations, we had in the debate a challenge that was approached about the SAI posture, about recommendations that talks about institutional relation in the political level and recommendations about the parliament. And that was very interesting. The GAL that brought recommendation and deliberation in a wide way. faced to the US Congress, specifically try a direct approach to talk to the Congress that what they wait, what they need in terms of legislation and budget management, instead of directing their effort only to the executive branch. So, because of that, the delay of report delivering, how can the SAI should deal with that? They should respect the institutional relation without having a risk to go into some susceptibility. So that is, Alessandra, the team that I think that we can have a debate. Roberto, would you like to say something? I think that Elias said a lot of points. Maybe I can wait after the comments. I would like to open and talk to the colleagues. Some are in Teams platform, so any one of you can show your opinion. It's open to the participations. Laes, would you like to start? You're looking at me. It was a coincidence. I was just waiting for you to call for somebody, so it was a coincidence. But if you put me in this enterprise, I'm going to start. I wrote down some things. Good afternoon again. I'd like to thank to be in my former house, it's a house that we work a while in SEMAG. We work with people and then people become secretaries. Congratulations for the work. I thought that was very interesting what Neemias said, because I wrote down some issues. I talked with Thais and she reached the same conclusion that I did. And I think that's very interesting, Neemias mentioned, which the base, which is the concept of budget that we are talking to. It's something trivial, but maybe not. Are we working with a strict concept of budget or a lato concept of budget? Because in the Brazilian case, I consider that a reasonable amount of appeals of research that came from taxes, like from the S systems. We have 25 billions per year, and it's not in any budget. There is no budget for that. Let's talk about the cases of the professional counselors that we say sometimes just a few, but there are 4 billion per year, the amount of all of them. So it's 30 billions by year that are not in the budgets. And there's not only SOFIs, it's not in the law, goes anywhere. In the professional counselor is a little worse because we don't have a notion what happened. For example, the S system, these values are published in ordinance from the ministers that supervise that, but the ordinance are not law. We're not talking about the budget law in the strict way. Or the Social Security Fund that we don't know what's its nature. It's outside of any research, but it's applied to a public policy. For example, we do not consider the expense of the S systems as education expenses. And these entities are traditional superaverage. It's an allocation issue. We have considerable resources in these entities, and in other places there's a lack of resources. So how we can consider that the integrability, the holiness of the public budget. How can we consider that? I could say another as the state company. We have to consider if we are dependent or independent. We already live some times issues like that, and they are outside, or the taxes, or the renounce of taxes, or the BNDES case, and it's outside of any notion of budget in the wide sense. So maybe that's an issue that could be seen, because probably the situation that we live, some other country can be living also, to have an amount of expense outside the budget law, and some situation could be worse than the budget itself, for example.
Another question that I find interesting that we could also reflect about is regarding the idea of budget that I'm using is the concept of budget as cash flow. I think many countries don't use cash flow, but we have lived some dilemmas in Brazil with some operations without cash flow, and they were passing through the budget. So these operations, they are competences or they are cash flow? Should they be in the budget or not? So it's relevant for us also to take into consideration. And there is also another one, but I will leave that for afterwards to not monopolize the dialogue. But since you look at me, I will only look at the other side. Thank you very much. All this emergency question is it's the first answer we should have for this situation, thinking about the budget third worthiness, because we have looked at some operations that are necessary to answer if we should pass through the budget or not. And now we are starting to see that again. Some operations that they tend to be to accumulate, like the household investment fund, which has a big fund in investment. And so they want to manage better the households, and using the household funding for that. But regarding the executive understanding, this doesn't come into the budget, but in our perspective, it should pass through the budget. But so there are other examples like compensations for tributary credits, like regarding the 113 constitutional norm. So should that pass through the budget or not? Because it's the same thing, like somebody that has won a lawsuit against the union, so should they be allowed to use these credits in some actions, participation, investment? So should that also pass through the budgets, yes or not? So this is a very important question that we should answer. Good afternoon, everyone. Laércio, I see that we have a challenge in Brazil, especially in the union, because with the rooftop amend, this starts to be in the fiscal budget, and so we see some initiatives to escape from the rooftop. It's not a matter of transparency in itself or to not be out of the budget, but sometimes we try to be out of the budget because of the rooftop, this glass ceiling. Sometimes I saw that one day uh, they were gonna go over the rooftop of expenses, and somebody just wanted to say, "Okay, can we take out the part of the federal police, the part of the passport s- expendence values to like to diminish the budget." So because this happens because the bodies all the time they are looking for escaping the rooftop of expenses. So as much as we make the fiscal policies harder, so the ideas to sneak out of these public policies which are more restrict. So this is a control point that we need always to be aware of. It's a permanent struggle to be within the budget rooftop. So it's important to see how the countries and the OFS are modeling these fiscal policies in such a way that it becomes a indicator and KPI that the OFS can after face in terms of controlling. So when everybody in the system see that we've told them they have to be within the controlling, so they are afraid. So they are going to start thinking about several different initiatives to be out of the budget. So now I think this is the challenge of the Brazilian budget across these past 2 decades in the austerity programs. Can I,
A respeito dessa questão,
regarding
você
this question
mencionou
of
extra
this
orçamentário
financing
de políticas
of
públicas ou
extra
estratégias
budget
administrativas,
policies or
acho que o mais
some of the
importante é a
administrative
visão daquelas
operations, I
como
think it's
risco,
important to
a
understand them
vulnerabilidade
as
orçamentária.
risk, as
Elas existem em
budget
alguma medida.
third
Sempre
worthiness,
acredito que em outros países
because
também
I believe that in
também
other
acho que precisamos
countries,
existir
in
esse
some
tipo de
extent,
despesa para fiscal,
there is
renúncia de
this
receita, mas é preciso diagnosticar o quanto
beyond
isso
fiscal
representa um risco à
expenses, and I
vulnerabilidade.
understand this
E
is
aí
a
auxiliar
risk
você
for the
muito
third
pertinente
worthiness.
a
So
abordar
I think
esses
what she said
incentivos
was very
que ajudam
pertinent
como teto de
because
gastos
it's really
ou como
important to
contingência
point
de
out
ajuda
this rooftop
fiscal, eles geram.
to
Porque a
understand
escolha
how people are
para
trying to sneak
fazer
out,
uma
because
renúncia orçamentária
the
não é uma
choice
escolha
to sneak out is not a
histórica ou
historical
deliberada, mas
choice or
sim
even a organical
inclusive justamente
choice
para fugir de alguma
just
restrição
to
orçamentária.
flee away from any
Deliberada
restriction.
é
It's
claramente um
deliberated.
risco para essa
It's a risk
credibilidade.
for this
Você acredita que
credibility.
nem
Not
toda
all the
desempenho de despesa fora do orçamento
development
elas
out
podem
of
ser
the
vistas assim como
budget can
risco.
be as
O
a
FGTS,
risk,
por exemplo,
like
está
for
fora do
example
orçamento,
the
então você tem o
FGTS, which
governo
is
buscando
out of the budget.
transferir
But
políticas
when we
públicas
see the
significativas
government
para o
trying to
FGTS para
transfer
ampliar sua
some of
atuação
the
fora
public
do
policies
orçamento,
to
é
be
claramente
taking the
um
money
risco.
from the FGTS, so
As
that's a
políticas
risk.
fiscais,
And
como a sua,
the
elas são fonte de
uh,
risco também para a credibilidade orçamentária.
fiscal policies in Brazil, they are very important to be implemented and established, so we avoid these problems.
Just to confirm, that's exactly how we are addressing the issue in the handbook. we have seen in many countries an increasing fragmentation of public financial management systems and an increasing resort to mechanisms to put resources outside the regular budget process. And as we are looking at, but I think some of the examples and maybe providing some specific examples of the relation between some fiscal mechanisms and these processes might be useful, but we are looking at it exactly in that sense, as a risk, budget credibility risk, more at the whole of government level.
Só trazer mais
Just
exemplo.
bringing out some other example. I understand this is the starting point. This budget thirdworthiness, thinking of the budget as an object to see until where it goes. So this part of the budget, I would like to ask also point out some examples from the abroad, like the U.S. They started taking all the budget from the presidency, and they started having a like the presidency supported uh, by the public policy. So after it was taken off, so I think this didn't become a risk for the governmental accounts. There was a separation because in the moment we have a deficit, and this deficit is not a uh, asset coverage. So I understand this is makes more sense to bring into the discussion. But if there is not that, I don't think we can support that on some assets that we don't have. Like for example, the FGTS, it's a very heavy resource. I think it's about 500 millions, and it's used for the public policies with the government participation. But it's a public money, and there is a risk with the union. So the question is, what is the measure of the risk for the union, which is a very important point. So this state companies also have some good importance on that. Like in Portugal, they ask accountability from the companies, and when they get 2/3 of uh, this help from the companies they get a greater independency from the government, and they have less restrictions in terms of budgets or fiscal policies and etc. So this is just a example of looking for the balance between the control and the risks. So we need to have the control which is proportional to the risks. Um, and it is necessary to balance the accountability and a level of a responsibility with the flexibility too, which is also eventually necessary. So these are the greatest challenges for fiscalization in the government. And so as far as the budget topic go, that's what I want to mention, but I have other points afterwards. Good afternoon. I have several questions, but I will only address one. First one is when we think of making this fiscalization for the third worthiness. In this third worthiness, we will consider the parameters of uh, analyzing from the base, like the principles to analyze them. We will analyze the third worthiness of the criteria, because sometimes we just distort the concept, and I'm very shocked. The first, for example, the first result sometimes comes out, and for me, I just think like, oh, that's not very credible, because we can sometimes think, okay, was the criteria well done and the criteria were well applied or not? So the question is, should we analyze the criteria regarding the targets and the goals that we are trying to look for? This is a very important question and brought a lot of debate in our discussions. I believe that we as we have the tendency to say that yes, uh, uh, these are the object of our body, but it's important to understand that this is not a universal view. It's connected to our culture. But for example, there was a French colleague that he didn't understand the criteria as we do, uh, especially how the premises brought over the creation of the budget. So he had difficulties understanding a approximation of the control body in terms of uh, having a freedom to criticize afterwards the creation of these processes. So, so it's a view that he had, but I prefer my our vision uh, to I preferably have my preference of see the premises that actually bring to the conclusion and see the whole process. And so I understanding the principles, the why things were made of, and then why the measurements were adopted step by step afterwards. So I think that we should um, more or less be more insensitive to some of these uh, means by understanding what the goals are. But just complementing, my question is, this wouldn't impede us to this exam to go beyond the booklet. Is it correct? Yes, it is. In terms of the work elaboration, we part from our background, but some elements are insightful, so they can be a little bit more flexible regarding some colleagues' perspectives. But in terms of TCU and its acting, I personally agree that there are some aspects connected to risks that are not observed, and if they are not observed, they can actually be a moral risk, ethical risk. You can have a breach uh, to manipulate some aspects that of the documents, so which can be bad. So I totally agree that it's important to do this job of understanding the criteria. I just wanted to comment that during our debates we also talked about in terms of the budget to look at the uh, budget principles, because these principles like unity, universality, exclusivity, when we consider these topics, we would address some of these problems that were brought up by Laercio, because he says that, oh, should this the specific revenue should be considered in this budget or not. The question is, okay, is this a budget revenue or is it is not? So this is the great question we should understand. And then if you conclude that it is not and it should not be on the budget, so it should not be on the budget. So when the first budget we try to give these aspects, so we need was followed by the principle of how did we created these principles that make the logic to follow this budget. So this is the way to actually alert of some questions that are happening right now, and we understand and know that Brazil is passing through a very difficult moment regarding the budget principles, uh, because we create a rule that is constitutional, but this rule also creates a incentive from that in our behalf. They are uh, we see that they are taking some obligatory expenses to put other expenses that are not necessary. So regarding the booklet, I think it has the goal of looking at what should and what shouldn't be on the budget. So that's what we have done. I wanted to complement what Roberto has just mentioned. We've explored a lot the realism on the budget when making it. We were very satisfied uh, by suppressing some obligatory expenses in constitutional orders like general regime and some benefits that are recurrent from the constitutional ordering, which are out of the union budget. They are expenses that are estimation from the technical bodies that propose them, or so they are either suppressed by the Congress or they were not approved. So, with no question, I say here that because it's written in our report that was approved by the plenary, so we suffer of a very difficult problem that from the principles of determining what should be in the budget and what shouldn't be in the budget. So these principles is show these are showing what's very the range that you can use the budget, but the problem is that I cannot oblige the executive power to follow it. I understand you because I understand that in some moments we would look at the public policies with a wider look, because there are some of them that are being financed by social awareness, but in informal terms we cannot advance on them. And another topic that I would like to ask you is
How we can see when Emil says that the point of view put by the SAI France representative that not see an action in France that's going to look to the goals and some KPIs that are essential to to a realistic budget. That I understand that the realism principle it's inside of all the other principles. It's if not whole, it's not realistic, and that's with the other principles. So there is any perceptions if it's a fruit of a country with more or less consolidated institution to talk about some actions in New Zealand with a level of transparency, social control that are higher. Could seems that it's absurd bureaucracy, and in another nations some institutions or some concepts are not so well developed and consolidated. If the SAI doesn't have don't have an action, so that make it harder, and this civilization advance be compromised. There is a perception in this sense or not? If countries like France and others They're known as developed in several economic aspects. If they have this perception or it was something not noticed, I would like you to complement because it's very hard if you take the norms from another country with fruits of several factors, for example, historical, and we adopt it in the other. So I think that's the challenge for us to have this handbook that involves several factors: social control, transparency, corruption index, education index. That's my question. Yes, Luciane. Through the whole process, I think that one interesting thing on this kind of process and the nature of the work related to the comparison between the good practices in the international environment in this kind of project is the possibility to you reflect about the practice that you're going to see always. You have the notion that the way you do the things in your country, it's a possible way and not necessarily the only one. Could be the better or not. And give us some to be humble, to reflect and evaluate. It's different to say that we are wrong or right and the opposite. I don't think that desirable to have a solution package to A or B place because the places do not agree between each other, especially countries that make maybe similar, but there are some divergence between them. And as we said, Lucien, there is this cultural historical issue and the building of the institution. There is a series of reasons that can explain this difference of approach. One of them is one kind that SAI from Brazil, the SAI from France do not do, depending on the situation, that they don't have the necessity to go deeper in this kind of analysis. Sometimes they look at the bad results of the work because sometimes they don't have a good results because they think that the situation is already solved. In our case, we have to look because the benefit to make these verifications overcome its worth in the control. So I think it's case by case analysis. There is a comparison project, and it's very enriching, and always led us to a reflection to think what we do, how we can improve our works. And I'm sure it's relevant to have this open approach in the sense that we can bring in what is relevant and bring the practice to us in a rational point of view and in a case-by-case analysis. There's not only one answer for every kind of cases.
We did a survey earlier this year through Intosai with the Intosai community. And actually what we found in the results of the survey is that most supreme audit institutions in the sample that replied to the survey, they do not assess economic modeling or macroeconomic forecasting assumptions, but a few do, like Indonesia and Brazil and other countries. I think we see a range of variation in that case. For many SAIs, like the case of the French Court of Accounts, it's an issue of mandate. They see it as something that is not the responsibility or falls under the mandate of the SAI. However, we have other supreme audit institutions like the National Audit Office of Finland, which also has competencies as a independent fiscal institution, and they do a really strong job in terms of evaluating and assessing the macroeconomic forecasting used by government for their projections. So I think we have that range of variation. I think one of the values that the handbook may bring is actually to illustrate that variation and show that, well, some supreme audit institutions maybe are not looking at these issues, and therefore there are some dimensions related to credibility that they are not actually evaluating or exploring. There are some other good examples and good practices that supreme audit institutions may follow in that area. So, but we see all this range of variation, and I think for most SAIs it's mostly related to their mandate and to what extent they understand their mandate in a very strict sense.
Olá, boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, you all. I'm Rodrigo. I'm conducting similar work of information non-financial, so it's interesting to have this question here. They're related to necessity of the non-financial issues as brought here. And one of those is if the SAI should assure what's real or what's legal from the principle that could be legal changes that can institutionalize in property or go against the principles or against evidence. So in this context, what's your role as SAI? SAI 3000 it's a document that I'm using to this work bring the role of auditing in itself to bring safety that the information in the report that is real, the information is trustworthy, and the criteria to be utilized is institutionalized roles that allowed all kinds of irrealism to legalize irrealism. So what's your role as SAI? So the answers of the auditing reach us for us to ask this question. So it's interesting the way how credibility is treated in this document. So it brings and divides the concept of the credibility in 5 factors that's brought in the whole of the information, if the information is relevant, neutral, and it's trustworthy. So I thought that was very interesting, this posture, to have this concept inside the document, because with this factor of the information quality, we can analyze under several looks. In the case the non-financial too, maybe in the future we can trace or quantify based in analysis, in perception, in the professional judgment of the auditor, how trustworthy is this information. And maybe trace and follow up how these curves related to these factors are evolving during the time. Are we having loss or not? And I think it's something that we should do as SAI to analyze the information not only through the laws and norms, but how people are adhering to these laws and international norms. Because on the contrary, we see that the public administration are neutral. And I think that it's a risk as SAI through the time we are evaluating and bringing credibility to non-truth information. So I think it's very important. It's interesting to see that SAI brings this issue the necessity that the utilized criteria, because it's measure and information, and that could be an analysis object from the auditors. So in these documents, I'm trying to show a matrix to evaluation to adequate the criteria to compare to the international norms, because it brings an example. For example, the food, if the government decides to legalize, normatize health foods, and it has a higher level of sodium, high level of chemical products, are we going to use that? Are we going to say that's okay? So in the case of financial information, we don't have a standard for that. So it depends on the adopted criteria. So we bring the solutions to that a little bit abstract, but it was important steps in this direction. So we can see to the financial information, which can measure only one measure to do, yet we have issues of relevation and holiness. Some of the insights, personal insights as auditor, we need to evaluate these issues on the look of the norms. About the question of Luciene, of institution level development, Arancha talked about that the literature says that is a risk in the budget developed countries and developed and non-developed countries, is a risk tracked by the EU and IMF. So I think it's not something only for countries, a development issue. And then we talk about the budget credibility, we can ignore the analysis of the projection of macroeconomic projections. In the moment of the elaboration, when they reach to the end, there is a low decrease diagnosis. They need to identify the relevant factor. And sometimes we have a upper estimated revenue. I believe when we talk about budget credibility, if the analysis do not occur in the discussion, are going to happen at the end when they diagnose the execution. So it's my way of thought. Cannot take out of the credibility discussion. It's a mandate discussion, but in my point of view, talk about credibility, we are going to enter in the budget trajectory. I will talk about that. How crucial is this discussion, if can enter or not in the estimative that was put in the bill of budget law. The discussion of handbook, it's about budget credibility in a technical view, to compare the budget with this execution. In this kind of the work, the purpose is the criteria where we want to reach, and the situation that we have is the executed. It's the cause of an eventual gap between the made and the reached. And also possible to do this evaluation of the estimatives under several perspectives. We do that a lot, from the aggregates and to goals in the LDO, seja TDU or made in the parameter trade, to the aggregates of revenues and expenses. And now we are deal in a critical level which is you have a mandatory expenses to create space, and the pressure is under the expenses. It's a new possibility of for us to act because it's a new risk to Brazil. We have 2 points that should influence if SAI are going to act or not. One is the mandate. In some moment can restrict. If you have a restrict mandate, we have some alternatives. And the other one is the risk. For example, Brazil happen of that being problem, and we have the under-evaluation of mandatory expenses. So we have to have an answer as the control, an attent control with the critical risk and draw an action to answer. And one point that comes with this question about the manipulation of the rule, there is a choice that we have to do because this periodic analysis is expensive, has a higher cost than the punctual analysis. When we have a periodic evaluation, we have a predefined criteria, strong. We agree, auditor and auditor agree with that to do an analysis in the period of time of assurement. But when they disagree about the criteria, the better path is to do a specific work and say, now we are going to discuss this criteria. In our case, as a court, we have the possibility to have a decision and define the understanding of the auditor or the auditor understanding. And then we have the standardization of this question. We have some that has this kind of situation. GAL has an area that's to analyze representation against BIT and against budget interpretation, with the role that SEMAD do. And this way, as far as I know, when we have the decision is the one. Because if you put this components in the periodic analysis, can alterate your capacity. Until now, we are in the majority, we are in the concept, and what I told in this restrict approach of credibility, in this approach, more restrict. But I know that when I read the draft, I did not understand when the document brought to the credibility concept the issue of the delivery, the effectiveness. I thought that was weird. I'm still trying to understand the reach of that and how and auditoring that are doing annually or periodic can always act, bringing that as one of the criteria of the credibility. I see in one of the Nehemiah's slides, he showed 5 risks that affect the credibility. And that was what I'm saying. The last risk that was an effectiveness of the governmental delivery. What delivery are we talking about? Is the delivery that, because I saw a risk, the SAI demand a delivery that was not hired by the government with the population that elected the ruler. So the auditor has to consider what is delivered is not adequate for some reasons, because of some criteria that he understands in his works. But that was not what the elected ruler hired with the people that elected him. So I see this risk, I see another risk, which is the demand and acting beyond what is financially possible in that moment to demand a delivery, and to that delivery we need to expand the fiscal expand that's not good for a country. And another risk in this approach, it's the suppression of, when Alexandre mentioned the low level, the low execution of the expenses, talking about the expenses execution can be considered to hurt the credibility. But if we start to talk about a lot about that, I'm going to give an example to be clear. If the government intends to act in some area, put some budget on that during the period of time, could not deliver this product and do not do that, and then the auditing comes and said that there's not a trustworthy budget because of that. In the next year, they simply are going not to receive nothing to get away of this risk, to not have a trustworthy budget. And the last risk of this approach is that the government do not act only by budget. The government acts for several others policies. For example, the health policy, sickness control, and the government can act, for example, letting the private initiative to make the infrastructure of the infrastructure, and the budget is not going to show this what they reach. So there was the points that I observed. The delivery and the effectiveness inside the concepts. Roberto, would you like to comment? Yes, I was with my hands raised before this Alessandro consideration, because I think that open a new debate. I'm going to talk about the previous point. I think that was very well put by the people that talked before me about the mandate issue, and always there is a concern about some of the SAIs in the sense to give lines of the act. If you go to the policy elaboration, you got compromised in to evaluate in the second moment, but the main message that I want to say is from what I would be reading. What's a good practice is the government to disclosure documents contain this or budget They are calling pre-budget statements. So this practice has been being done in.
So what I have seen is that regarding the information divulgation more than the evaluation from the OFS is that we always have to have in mind, uh, and we have this already in TCU, to not interfere in the public politics, so we can have the intention to have a neutral judgment afterwards when there is a problem. The question of Alessandro I will comment afterwards. So I also got pretty curious regarding the scope when Elias mentioned the challenges, and he said that where goes the worthiness of the budget. So he's we were mentioning when we take the wrong premises, this is the bigger problem. So, and then when we talked about the understanding the budgets and the application from the booklet on our processes, so I understand that we need to evaluate better the link. So within the financial KPIs, there is the execution. So when you have the KPIs, you uh, enhance the worthiness of this execution, and then comes the rules accomplishment, which there is a fiscal policies, and then the last one from Alessandro, which is effectiveness from the politics, because they go to the effectiveness of the budget, which is very much harder and complex to evaluate. But on the other hand, there is another tool to attack this. In Brazil, we are doing the public policy report that we are trying to connect with the budget budgetary process, so we can annually until September 30 we can report to Congress the public policy evaluation. I believe that we are in the fifth or sixth round, and this was a opportunity to say and express how the effectiveness of the program is, including the budget execution. I know that France is doing something similar, that when they finish their account analysis, they put it to annex their budget. So I maybe this is the way of contribute this evaluation. There are several challenges to do that on an annual base. So the question is, how can I actually do all these evaluations? So the question is the SAI that will do it? Um, Here in Brazil, we created the SYNAP, which is the evaluation body that has done a apparently good work, and we have seen some of the reports and have seen some good works with the limitations that we have, because there's around 15 programs that we are evaluating during the year. But the greatest challenge in Brazil is to make this evaluation to turn into a decision. We have good information, we have a good evaluation, but it doesn't turn into results. So I think the greatest challenge here is to uh, feedback this process and to understand these evaluations. So the institutional arrangement needs to uh, open a little bit more for us to uh, evaluate them, or maybe they can evaluate them, or to understand if their evaluation is well done or not. So there are some ways to actually improve this. So this is a topic to define on the handbook, if it is this a point of effectiveness or not, because sometimes we'll have to look for similar cases that have already passed through to understand what we have to do. I also shared this story from Alessandro, and I see all the problems too. From what I remember, the public policies work was a program done over the audit of results. These result audits sometimes are not the same audits that you are willing to do, which is annual. It will talk about some things that are included on that, but it's not the same thing. So you don't have a clear vision of a annual budget. So here in Brazil, the public evaluation policies works a lot with PPA, and sometimes they are not uh, budgetary resources. We have several programs included in them that we don't know how to make it compatible to the budget. So on the other hand, with the government has a work with the other entities and bodies of organizations so they can have better KPIs, targets, intermediary KPIs. So this may be a way, maybe we will not achieve all the effectiveness, but it will help to understand how is the compatibility with the budget they are presenting and the needs they have. So it's at least a goal that you can accompany uh, with the KPIs. But I have a difficulty to understand how this marriage between the results audit and the annual fiscalization can be matched. Truly, the our public policy report is still being built. It's the last son that we is going to be born. So we have other programs. I mean, it's not the last one, but there is another program to come up. But we understand we have already tried three different approaches in this program, and it was already defined last year. Uh, for example, we have the BPC. We defined some benefits to the low-income people. We have a program with 60 million reais that is efficient, um, that reaches the population in this situation, but it's ineffective sometimes because it has a huge problem to understand who actually needs this money. So we understand the inefficiencies in the design and in the execution. So when we go into the analysis, we see a focalization rate of people that actually need this money is very low. So like Bolsa Família, We also have a undue rate of payments very high. People getting money that they do not need. A judicial rate also very high. So, for example, our rate of elderly poor people is very low, like 5%, and in the program it's 15%, and 30% of children, and it's not this much of people that get the money, so there's a problem there. So, and then it's our job to communicate better this audit work. So uh, like Fiscobras, we should do like Fiscobras because it goes to the work and see whether this work is being done well or not regarding the evaluation from the tribunal. But in case of wider programs, it's not very it's much simple to do this fiscalization because there are some specific norms and etc. We have this challenge, but we still understand it as viable. But we need to shape better the format of the evaluation and to communicate it to the Congress so they understand whether it has a utility or not. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fabio. I work at Smagi. In the beginning of this job, I participated in some meetings, but in virtue of other works I had also to participate, I am not able to join the team anymore. But Nemias and Roberto is representing the team very well. I would like to make some comments regarding everything that you have already said, regarding one point from Alessandro regarding the effectiveness, and linking to one thing that Nemias has also mentioned, which is the link between the budget and the planning. What happens is, in my opinion, it's a verification trustworthiness item of the budget. Because if the budget is not connected to anybody, governmental body, it's not trustworthy. Because the budget, what it is a law of goods. It's a means of goods. It's a mean to achieve a solution of from a solution of problem to a to go from a problem to a solution. So if you have a problem of what you want to attack, so your budget is not. Uh, if you don't have a program, you are not trustworthy because you are not solving anything. In Brazil, have already lost some of this sensitivity because our budget is very strict and inflexible. So uh, the problem is if 90% of the budget is inflexible for some idealistic programs and you have problems that are not solved. So how do we solve these problems? If the budget is rigid and the society is dynamic, so how can we solve the problem of society? Uh, if the society keeps in need of these solutions, so it's when the extra budget solutions come. So this discussion of budget and planning is very important. And then now I would like to be under your skin because this is very challenging to take it to a red book. But when you make this planning framework, uh, we should understand what is the link between planning and the budget because I can go into a very absurd conclusion of a believable budget but inefficient because it's something that can solve a problem but it's not a problem anymore of the society nowadays. So I think that some considerations of when we are going to make this audit, we need to ask and check of what is the link between the budget and the planning. And also, uh, the to understand the concept of the budget, to understand that is everything that is a means to achieve a purpose. So another thing is, since we have this very unflexible budget, the consequence was the exoneration growth. Uh, the exoneration cannot be perpetuated because sometimes we have a exoneration that was created for a specific need 15 years ago, and nowadays we don't have this need anymore, and the money is still there. So there is a disconnection of the application of the money to a real need of society nowadays. So my suggestion in a practical term is to have a section to check in minimal terms at least, um, to see, look, the country has a planning of the budget in this way, and these are the needs. So in this way we create the criteria to applicate it. Following the Thais and Fabio comments, we see that not all the countries have a budget. Sometimes they have their programs, they have KPIs, sometimes they start implementing and they take years implementing them in just on some sectors, in some ministries. So when we think of an international scenario, we see that what we see in Brazil is not reality. Just few countries have a budget for the program. In when we make our audit, we have a question regarding the information now budget, and we see that many realities are below a administrative operational reality, and sometimes the results are not very optimistic. So it's just to consider the international background and scenario, but I believe that what you said is very important, uh, in such a way that the budget should be compatible with the physical needs of the country. Debates like what we mentioned about the PPAs, sometimes there is not this link. Uh, and so since sometimes we had a the budget as a fictional reality, and now we are trying to implement some KPIs. It takes time to achieve these results and this implementation in the most realistic way. So the question is, how we can do that? How is this dimension of effectiveness that can be found in a middle term to going achieve all these points at the same time? So when we take into consideration the international impulse, we we also see how this discussion with the other countries can also system make a system and order better the discussions in Brazil. When we compare to other countries and l- you spot yourself and benchmark you with the other countries, you understand better how you can put yourself into the international discussion, and also how you can improve your internal processes. So you understand how this work of other countries can derive in uh, better processes to Brazil that are very sophisticated sometimes. I have not followed much what of other countries have done, but I understand that we can format a better solution to Brazil, taking into consideration some of the other countries' experiences. So I understand some things will not go into the booklet, but it can generate some solutions for the TCU's future. For example, I accompany some tributary policies in TCU. Uh, I understand. I saw that uh, we had to go into a conclusion to see how the tribunal should evaluate these questions. So, since this work is very new, it can be a seed to advance to a uh, um, greater interpretation that can be with a more uh, participative uh, sharing of TCU to the international framework.
Following what Alexandre says, and always about the concern of Alessandro, but the Brazil look, when I look to the manual purpose that has SAI and propose to reach the SAI that operate in a model focus to the model of USA and United Kingdom, it's understandable the dimension that we need to have for them. So it's very strong, this issue of the evaluation of the results. In terms of Brazil, just to share to our colleagues, especially from the offices that experience our processes and other ones, we had a budget of 4 trillions of investments, only 43. The majority of the expenses are the refinance of the debt, and we have a budget of the government companies over 100 billions, and the capacity to have of the states to make investment is a very low capacity. One point that to Brazil, to us from TCU, would be a very big challenge in this moment is for us to implement some actions from the handbook to focusing on our results. It's our federative model. If I speak about public policy, I cannot evaluate the public policy and took the health policy and took the money that union distributes to 25 states. I said that because it's written, so nobody know how that's applied. It's in the cash flow. If it reach the citizens and it's transforming vaccines in beds, nobody knows. Union doesn't know. So there is no monitoring of the policy as a whole. There is no evaluation, and there is not a feedback mechanism of the budget cycle. There was this EMET 109 that made mandatory. We made some recommendation, but we're going to have this period. If I have a national public policy, which 70% of the union budget is repassed to municipality states, and until now we cannot. I hope with the recommendation that were formulated and received in this Wednesday, we can, in the next 5 years, go forward in this sense. So, to be honest, today I'm going to take an auditing that we have no specialty unit in the education or health area, but our work that took a program, and I have a decision that are going to take one situation or another. I don't have an evaluation of the public policy as a whole. I believe that in 5 years our scenario are going to be other. But when I have a budget taking budget and in which Over 1 trillion is social security, and the majority of the research is repassed to the citizens. And then Tiago, these are the programs that will have the bigger capacity to evaluate in a macro vision because it's the centralized union to repass the resource of the citizens. I don't have a bid, I don't have repass to another entity that has the capacity of make the bid. So then the thing stopped and the money stopped. And when I see the results, I don't have a delivery. I have the budget stopped in the account of states. So to us, in our federative model, goes beyond of our constitutional competences. It's the Brazilian model that has its challenges, but it doesn't mean that the handbook could not have the result dimension. Eventually, some public policy that are automatized. TCU has a capacity to make a macro evaluation that is here. If you could talk about happy, okay, have some actions. And not in everything, these policies that are linked to a cooperative federalism, we are going to have a difficulty to have these results in a systematized way and inside a period that's be reasonable to the accounts or the analysis of below. But I see that this dimension as valid, and this point would be the most explored by those countries that had external control model. I would like to talk another point that I would like to SEMAC director Joaquim about the credibility when I have a budget dynamic that in fact or by the creation of public policy without realism that generate debts. For you to give an example, the unit approved in 2020 an amendment that amplify maintenance fund called Fundeb. The spends of the unit that 2020 was around 15 billions increased last year to 23 over 23 billion are going to reach 65 billion in 2026, and depending how the complements of the union related to the index cost and quality would be regulated by a law could reach 100 billion per year, 1 trillion in 10 years. So when I look to the union budget, I only had 5 billion and the 14 was conditioning because would be costed by the public title emission. So that's the public policy is amplified in Brazil. This is a main point. Another point is when we saw not realistic what we're going to look. It's what we put in the budget, and eventually I could not implement the public policy that in Brazil to pay, or I do not put a parcel of my dynamic. I do not put in the budget and let it go. Like the National Museum that I always give as an example, diagnosed by an auditor when it melts in fire. And the origin of the problem was a budget issue. They didn't have a maintenance budget. So our history became ashes. And then we can see the history became ashes, the assets that are damaged because we don't have budget, or you have a high level of recognition of debt, or you have exorbitant number of expense. In my view, are Brazilian KPIs of non-realistic of the budget. So Joaquim can talk a little about that because it's linked in if this unit, this index, when I look to a 4 trillion budget, the most of them is debt. We don't have this revenue. I only put 2 billion what we have in the cash flow, half of the social security. We're going to look to that, how the other countries are in this level, or it's a two-way path, adapted a component to analyze the budget, because if the union, these numbers are not relative, because I have a high refund of debt. We have a work, Minister Benjamin worked in this theme. We analyzed the accounts, and there the most majority of the debt is the recognition of debt. So it's not real. They not put what they have to pay to taxes to the federal revenue and all kinds of taxes and obligations. So I have a debt, Aranja. There is not fruit that when I come to the back and made a road, developed the economic, it's a current expense. So until when are going to be KPIs or intend to have a look to the public debt to constitute them? Is this an investment in fact, or do I have beyond the debt a load of this debt because of the expense that should be treated in a real way and are not in this way? So I made a reflection to Joaquim and to Andrea. If you could talk a little bit about that. Good afternoon. I confess that at beginning I was a little bit lost, but I would like to say, Luciane, to talk about what Fabio mentioned. I think that's very important when we talk about the budget realism principle. And you analyze that aligned to the fact that we have a very wide operation of the state. So it's very interesting for you to have the both views. And then when we look in this sector review, if you don't have budget to science and technology, why should we have that? So it's a reflection that we have to make. It's something that's have been happening. We heard about the Embrapa case, which is a company. The studies that we see, it's one of few companies that has a positive results according to big economies in Brazil, and they don't have budget. So we need to think about that. We need to care about the budget credibility, but we need to face the problem. We have to act in all the areas in the Brazilian state to provide every service to the citizens. So we don't have budget to accomplish the citizen demands. And the other things that I would like to talk about is the planning of the budget. To bring a concrete case, we have a fund to develop technology and it has a governance structure. And we have another tool that's the annual plan of investment. Last year, we follow up this plan, and at the end of the year, the plan was not approved. It's where the money is going to be invested. So we had this question, and why we didn't have that finished? We don't know how much money we're going to receive, so how we're going to mobilize all the people that are going to work on that if you don't know if you're going to have budget. I was thinking that makes sense what they talked about. So how you're going to evaluate this policy if the management wait for the budget to execute the public policy? It's a circle that we cannot reach the other side. Related to evaluation of public policy, the report that we call HAPPY, it's not reach a model that helped to have this or budget discussion. I think that's possible because of the example that I said before. It's very complex. The value that's in the budget, how the policy is executed, and how you can join that. So I think it's very interesting if the TCU can go forward on that and training to the auditors that work in team areas to have this look of the budgets because they have the tendency as an auditor to investigate the side that you know more. I think that's it what I'd like to say. Thank you very much. Adus raised the hand. It's very quickly. I'm Dulce Fonsemaghi. Related to the observation from Alessandro, I agree with him. The extreme. About your observation, Alessandro, can you hear me? We have two risks to have this result dimension, and the other is to not look at them. Because sometimes we can have only a formal budget, so we have to have an average of that. Somehow the budget analysis has to incorporate because otherwise we're going to have a formal analysis. I have to go. I really want to talk, but I need to go. Joaquim. Roberto is in the line, but I want to say something. Would you like to start, Roberto? Can you hear me? Well, I'm going to answer. I'm going to try to answer this question. I would like to say, to make comments to Neemias and Roberto mainly. I'm going to start about the definition of budgets is the use of the state. In fact, we have a load, tax load in the pattern of LCD with we add the benefits going to be beyond the average of LCD, and the services are not good. In a general overview, the products are not good. They are offered in a lower amount than demand, or the quality is low. When you talk about these concepts to verify the difference between the planning and the execution, I have a hard time with that. What level are you going to use that? This criteria is not complete. Please don't be upset by that. But the problem is which criteria was the classified level of this action program, government function, nature of the expenses. So I have a hard time with that. The main idea is that the state should provide some goods and service called public goods, but with time, the citizens can have that. I think that even the poor countries, when the state takes money, even from the ones that have a better situation and redistribute to the necessity people, some money lost in the way. So the control view should have rules amazing. If you don't accomplish the rule, so this is my first concern. An observation about I saw that in the handbook structure is about public policy. I realized that it starts with preparation, approval, monitoring, reporting. So it has a framework of the cycle of public policies to go to the part to go to some cases. It's a suggestion. I would not be concerned about the effectiveness or the efficiency if I go to do a work like that, because this outcome issue is very hard to measure, and the concept of result that we have, it's not outcome. I can That's not necessary to say that. So I'm concerned about the efficiency. The budget tool, it's a perfect KPI to costs, but we can evolve to the concept of expenses to the cost concept, and so it can compare and in space and time. We have several units. It's not the only criteria, but when you talked about the costs in Amazon, it's not the same costs in Moema City. Only to suggest that the possibility to think about that. I would like to tell a joke about one of partner. Once I was in a meeting and I said, yeah, that country has a managed banking, but it doesn't have any bank. And that's it. You have a difference of stages in every country, so it's very complicated to do a thing to everybody. So stopping here, I'm going to the Luciene point. I hope I can answer. I have a few more minutes. The first thing, tax. In some moments, friends are going to concern about standards. When you have 2%, this is the first thing. What's the better answer? You pay less profit and pay the most. But this price have a variation. If I understood the Lucien's observation, I understand the why we have debt was a past public policy, simple like that. When the state can found cheaper than the other agents and could partial default with the inflation. I cannot talk much about that, so it's easy. There's a lot of people, so I agree. But the point is when you have that the tax load do not overcome. I'm not against the expand. I think the financial demonstration are essential, but they expand in some items are so important. Is not, for example, the school expand. You're beating the next generation, so to pay well the teacher is good, but we cannot transfer all the time to municipalities and states. I don't know if I answer why it's worth, because the benefit do not ends in that. And when you create and seek for this profession, mainly for the poor countries. So to close, I think I'm going to end now. Just to remind that maybe it's worth. It's hard with so many people involved. Do not imagine that a difference between the planning and the executed. It's so bad. The ideal would be, because they have the inflation, but the ideal is that the project should end. Have to build the school and then it ended.
So there was a guy in Amazon, and he asked to buy clothes done already, but he should hire somebody else to do that. So in terms of logic, for projects, it would be interesting to see somebody that could diminish the expenses. So this way, the budgetary realism would be more objective. And in terms of in actions and concessions, uh, regarding the commissions, maybe uh, sometimes the commission are from expenses or projects or topics. Um, just just to conclude, this is not the only way to interfere, because it's regarding the benefits, but also from the regulation. The state should. So it's that I talked more than I actually wanted. It's not actually what I wanted to say. The big question is, why the manager do that? Why does the manager do that? When we are controlling, we should understand that the riskiest thing for a manager is to do something. The best thing for him is to not do anything. So the question is, why is he not doing? Roberto, it's your turn. Luciano, if I didn't answer you after we talk. No, we are lined up in the cost, and we understand the need of advancing in this agenda. I would only like to talk when everybody else uh, talk, because I would like to put my vision of how we address this problem in our discussion group, because I also had uh, concerns regarding some stranger aspects of how we were addressing this result topic in the booklet. So I will express rather my personal view on this topic, and then Anemias could correct me if I had any wrong perception. But the first point I would to express is regarding Thais' considerations is that for me it's clearer that the budgetary credibility will be only a element of works that uh, SAI will conduct. It's not only one. It's not only one object. In our case, like TCU, if you thought of a one work that could address this question, is the concessions of government accounts. So, and then we come to a very old problem of ours of how to address the second document problems, which are the presentation of the public politic results. We still debate on this topic, so we shouldn't look at this booklet now in terms of results as if it were the only things. The other topic is the uh, diversity of SAI, because several SAI have put with a lot of property that we should incorporate this result dimension of the politics and the governmental action, and it's undeniable to leave this aspect aside, not as not being a essential aspect when we have to treat the credibility. So when we look at the manual, we have to we see that it takes into consideration two ways. When we concern the specific deliveries, the booklet expresses that when we treat the works in the entity level. So in the entity level, it would be possible to make a audit work in operational terms and to answer this question regarding the deliveries. We would also have, as it was enhanced in terms of dialogue, but there we would have a way to correlate the budgetary questions with the budget. So in this work, we see that TCU has a extensive experience of uh, auditing, and we see that it can take at least 6 to 18 months. So it's a deep work to be done, and the booklet also has the purpose of address this topic when it evaluates the BFM. When we, as evaluating the BFM, you will be able to build audits that observe intrinsic aspects of budget. So it was already mentioned that you can, in this perspective, look at the KPIs and see if they are well constructed. You can accompany the uh, result information even though you are not making a testifying work to see if these results were actually achieved. So I see that there are a set of situations of works to be done regarding the results, and that in some terms the booklet is capturing this uh, approach, in at least in the way I saw the discussions before. For example, in the morning I commented that from the beginning, in the first version of our draft, the one that we sent around, it spoke about the PFM system development because if one, which is in some extent is very interesting, it's on the other hand very complex. So how can I uh, uh, measure the budgetary national programs if I cannot so um, I have to engage that these procedures uh, is being done in a way, very adequate way, with integrality, the other part that's uh, informal aspects in legalistic, and conjugated with that, it can also be done some questions for evaluating the, and from there that it can be improved. And what I would like to address is that uh, the way I'm seeing now is the booklet is actually addressing well this uh, and it's very interesting all these discussions. There's a topic here that I see this topic that has different questions of what is credibility and what is performance. I think that internally we have to answer these questions with different audits. We have to have a financial audit for the credibility and one operational audit for the performance. And both of them are regulated by different documents too. And there is also another one, the 2900 guide, which is the evaluation for public policies, to see if this policy that was being applied is effective or not. But even the on OMTF, the medium term experiment that was done, we see that the last level is the performance level. So when we have to try to tie up the performance with credibility, which I am in favor of the performance, but I think this is a sign of a better of a maturity of the process and a of good um, budgetary governance. So I think this is a point to consider. Another point is the question of evaluation. So if we are going to evaluate that determine specific policy should be working, so we need to make evaluations. The question is who is going to do the evaluation? Should it be us or the government? Normally it's a function for the government. The point is we should actually uh, make sure that it's being done in partnership with the government. There are good news in these terms because there are several networks of researchers that are addressing different questions if these policies are working or not. So there are good news. There there is the GPAL that's doing a good job on addressing these questions. Recently they actually got the Nobel Prize of Economy doing something related to that. So it's interesting to see this job of theirs because they start with this question: if when the government provides goods to the most needed ones, if this breaks the economy or if this generates development or progress. They don't answer this question. They are not able to answer this question, but because it's a broad question. But they uh, they understands that this is very difficult to answer because it has a lot of variables in this equation, because sometimes it can depend of the government of the contest. So you can, these questions are asked by them. So there is this concept of inerrancy, that we need to accept these limitations, because sometimes if you say, oh, all locative information has to be with credibility, we are not able to do that. It's impossible. We are trying to put in our manager something that's impossible, that can even uh, hurt our take of decision of in the government. So we have to accept that some questions we cannot answer, or that it takes a process or takes a long time to actually answer it. It's in the nature of the problem. So performance and um, budget, there are two questions, and I think one is in our competency, and the other one is something that we have to stimulate the government to actually audit that. I think it's a sign of evolution and maturity. Just taking your last phrase, we have clarity that the expenses will bring some results 5 to 10 years after. For example, PISA results, uh, they only come afterwards. We have a very bad position in the PISA, so it's clear. Just to record one thing here, they are very insightful, all these discussions. First of all, I would only like to underline regarding the nature of the project, all these contributions that have been done and reflections are useful and valuable in terms of the credibility of the budgetary analysis. And in our project that Roberto and me we are working, they are regarding the recurrent auditing that are being done in uh, regularly in the budgetary area. Here I'm seeing a richness of these uh, contributions that are always welcome. We are in need of all these insights that we are taking here to implement afterwards in terms of SAI work. So it's a very fruitful afternoon, not only for me but for the project as a whole. As a whole. So these insights are very good, actually. Like what Lucien has said regarding the decentralized politics, or what Fabio said regarding the planning and the polit politics. I believe that the planning goes into the budgetary process too, but this regards some other chapters of the project. And then I understand that this meeting is being recorded and translated into will be useful for all the process of elaboration until the end of the project. So it's very rich. There is a lot of riches from the tribunal behalf. So now some punctual comments here. So the delivery evaluation and the dialogue of it with the work scope. I see here in real time the reproduction of a reflection that we had before. I saw it again, some discussions here that we have already seen before in one of the meetings that we had in internal way here in the TCU. And then after we spoke with other colleagues from other countries too. We have already skipped the part of the debate, but we have gone to the conclusions. And the conclusion got was that uh, we cannot escape from looking at the results. For example, the OCDE already brings 10 principles for the budgetary governance. It's not a unanimous admission. Some classifications do not bring this uh, admission, but we sometimes see a lot the presence of the deliveries and the results in one form and the other, including some normatives that also reflect that. So we here in the TCU we have already uh, tended to put this into the work. So we understand that we should not confund that as a uh, very long audit that takes more than 2 years. So this is also a reflection of how can we take this to people from other countries that do not have this background of practices. This was already a object of discussion in our meetings, presidential meetings that we had, and some colleagues came, and we shared this perception. I think that what Dulce says is the most precise one. We should go to a midterm. We should not only look at a like
That have its characteristics is going to go for a review, but it's something relevant that the manager look at that. So the experience has shown that's valuable. In the other hand, it not demands from defense in a current way to every policies to pronounce about the budget credibility. So it's not something that we can make always. What we do in the chapter 3, look to the KPI or the deliveries or the privilege look about efficiency. there so there is a balance that we evolved to talk about auditing engagement typical from performance analysis or performance evaluation without say that we're going to audit that. So we are trying to moderate this dimension without having it. So to end that as a point that Joaquin said, to say that we agree with you related to the issue, we see that it's very current in the literature. The theme of budget deviation, what from what was executed, it's very present on the literature, but since the beginning we reflect about that and seem to yield to us an incomplete view. To us, this is the point of start, is not the ending point, so we agree on this relevant aspect should be analyzed, but it's not everything that the court can do. Only that without seeing the cost issue, the lack of delivery, the incentives that are in the policy, information about tax rules that maybe the manager could not be so active. So we agree with that. I would like to. I would, Sergio Garrido, if you have any consideration, you be yourself comfortable. I'm Garrido, finance secretary, and I was saying that it's a very good discussion. I don't have much contact with the budget. I work with state finances, It's very enriching, and we reflect since from the beginning when I also talk about the points related to power taxes items. Social Security has 5 billions that are put. The money is public or private, should be the budget or not. I don't think so because it's a private research, but the government use that, so it's union responsibility. I don't have much to contribute with this specific just subject, but would like to thank, and I like it very much to work with so many experts. I would like to say that the FGTS money, if we do public management in the case of the banks, BNDES, do net lending and do public policy through the finance system. And a lot of thing is out of the budget, so we have to reflect. It's not a parallel budget, but it's not inside the conventional system. And I believe that the taxes rules, our tax registration brings the management to find solutions in the parliament. It's a challenge when we find the credibility issue. Thank you, Garrido. Sérgio, would you like to comment something? Just to thank you, I learned a lot of things. I really like the observation. In terms of problems in the budget, I had a fantastic update in a very short time, so it was very good. I cannot contribute because I have a small knowledge about budget compared to the experts here, but was a very good moment, so I'd like to thank you. Okay, thank you. The exam of the result is a reality. That's going to be in the handbook. No, because I'm thinking in the morning you said about the perception of the population. It's a risk because to the population they all want more. They are not concerned about the tax reality. The people's perception is I want more, I want resource, and when they have this perception it's very complicated. I have this concern. And I think that the first to evaluate public policies should be the manager, the court, as every in the government account, they are auditing, verifying how's the goal, the KPI. Beyond that, we should charge, see from the moment that the measurements of that are adequate in the side of the result or measured by the manager, because TCU will not have time to do that. So we expect the manager to evaluate. We cannot teach how they can evaluate the program. What code I want to know? We know that there are cases about revenues that not go to the budget, passport, there is another's. I remember that there was this process, the previous effect, the passport did not go forward because we killed this project. There was this project from Cefet and they verified that they have they have an issue to put in the budget the revenue of vestibular, and they solve I'm not going to put. We're going to receive that, pay the body, and then what's left we put the budget. It's the owner revenue, and justified by that because they estimate and then the soft cuts out. Like that, there should be another kinds of revenue outside the budget. So that's what caused the lack of realism. There is a something that you can make to detect that, to do an accounting, auditing in the bank account, because we need to have access to the public accounts. There is a prediction of some mechanisms to help in the controlling and monitoring that. I would like to complement this point. In the university case, that happens a lot when they have their own revenue, when they want to invest in a research. This is a big problem to the university. So if it is the budget, they're not going to do that, the research, because they're going to stop by the auditing. We have a lot of complaint about the science technology because they could not have the right to use this budget. So it's a serious issue. They develop some mechanisms like the support foundations. They use that to not go in the budgets. We had several agreements in the court about that, but Thais, in the case of this institution, we face that in Tier E from a state court from Northeast, Paraíba State, I don't remember. And the prosecutor answered to a penal suit because there is an action that determined that the body should put the money in the account of the government. It's a court guideline. If you don't make that, you go against the law. So they have legal suit and to respond about that. There are the ways, and then they have to be monitoring the internal control of the executive branch and the manager, as in the Constitution with the 109 amendment that altered the Article 37-165. This is an obligation of the manager. The executive branch has to do that. So you're going to do the works in the operational field and verify the body is in condition to do the evaluation. So you're going to evaluate the evaluator. Our evaluate is different from the one that they have to make. I'm going to evaluate if the manager is evaluating. It's not to substitute because we cannot do that, and the executive branch has the tax more field to do that. The executive branch has to structure itself doing this evaluation, and that reflects in the account monitoring. This could be the tool to evaluate the budget result. It's not that the entities has all this kind of competences or ways to do that. I don't see us substituting the role of the executive branch.
Last and quite controversial dimension of whether to include effectiveness and performance within the concept of budget credibility. And I would like to explain, and I think Roberto has provided a good summary, but I would like to provide, just to explain a little bit why it was included in the concept. And actually it was included in the concept because there was a request from many of the supreme audit institutions involved in the group, and not only in the group of 8 that we have now, but even those that also participated in the first meeting we had in May 2021, which some of them are not now engaged in the development of the contents. And they were very insistent and put a lot of emphasis that it should be bring into the discussions, at the same time being quite aware of all these challenges that you have been highlighting. And probably that what we can say regarding that dimension is going to be quite different maybe compared to the others in terms of maybe not being able to provide so much in terms of practical guidance, but maybe highlight some of the challenges and some of the attempts that have been done to link the execution of budget resources with outputs and performance and results. At the same time, there are different entry points within the work of the groups. Of course, TCU is leading one, but there are others, as we have discussed and presented. And as Roberto highlighted, I think probably those who are working at the entity and program level, it may provide a good entry point to try to bring more into the contents of the handbook, the discussion about effectiveness and performance, and also in those that are looking at more overall assessments of the performance of the public financial management system. There are also important elements regarding performance management information, some core functions of the center of government that may be critical to be able to make those connections between planning, budget execution, and results. And then a final point also is that one of the issues that we have also discussed in all the different meetings is that it's clear based on some of the examples that we have found, and also taking into account the different dimensions of the concept, that a more comprehensive assessment of credibility may require to combine different kinds of audit information, not only financial compliance, but also performance. And whether any, and of course this is a challenge in many supreme audit institutions, because I think you guys highlighted also, I mean, when you are also working in some kind of organizational silo, so people doing performance audit will not be working so closely with others working on the oversight of the budget. So also maybe make some recommendations in terms of how we can bring together and integrate a little bit different kinds of audit information within supreme audit institution. I think it will be more tentative, that part, more highlighting some of the challenges, but also maybe providing some entry points that could be used by supreme audit institutions to try to strengthen those areas.
Só tenho 3 pontos.
I have 3 points. One of those is to close related to these approaches, the creditability budget in the Nemi's speech. It talked about the research that were done of the kinds of work that are done, the financial combined with conformity, operational, and sometimes combined. I think that it's important to keep it clear, the scope or no scope, to not have to have impression that's the new auditing, because every one of that has a specific goal, and how we have norms of auditing in those side 2 objects. We have to, this is statization, debt, are objects, and then we apply these tools. And some points that came up make me thought in a limitation that INTOSAI norms have. In the finance, for example, they only consider the reasonable seguration. When we talk about the private sector of IFAC, you have the limited seguration for the annual demonstration, and also to the periodical demonstration in a lower periodicity semestral. So that could be a good referential. I saw that you were working with a lowest periodicity, so maybe this is a useful norm to mention. Tiago, I'm going to interrupt you. I think it's worth to mention Do you know these maps? I think that's important characters that could be brought to the follow-up of the budget execution made could have this heat mapped in a way that the manager can see how it's orange. This is the comment. This work to limited assurement are work that have based in risk. So this is the high risk and all the applied methodology risk. And what we do sometimes is a work that previous procedures agreements that we have a IFAC norm for that, where we have something that is going to be applying an object. And then when we are going to the approach based in risk, the possibility to audit the capacity of the government itself to do this work with a quality. Bring this approach based in risk that show up because we have to evaluate the government capacity to do that, the quality of control, the team, the technology, everything that's put to have a good budget. So this is a point into the handbook is very important to do this scope definition and non-scope because I read in the draft that we could have a suggestion from Intel side to open a front of all specific auditing, and this is an object, a specific object to have this awareness. And the last point that Luciene question about Joaquin, and I thought this was interesting. Laércio brought that. If the budget related to cash flow or competence, one aspect that we could put on that is 5 types that Nestor budget deviation, the incorrect premises,
And I will come back to these premises, and we already have a perspective to take the fiscal risk as a instrument to evaluate the premises. Now we have dealt with that, with the precatory problems. Our minister said that it was that it appeared like from nothing, like 200 million reais, and then we have to estimate where we lost this judicial way to get to this point. It's not easy, but it's important to uh, see that this number needs to be considered. So this number is we have to take it into account. I would go even beyond like some patrimonial risks because the value of infrastructure investment doesn't even recover our depreciation of structure. So this shows already that there is a deterioration. It's not wrong, but it's a KPI that shows that there is a problem. This dispositive shows that it has to be done too. In the third scope, shows that you should underline this scope or not scope because the part of the financial audit should not be a scope. I don't know. It should be seen, well seen, if this scope is specific for the budgetary execution or not. Because in this way it would be a scope. And there is also another possibility of scope that is very new in the tribunal that already exists in other countries. That is the conformity certification for the financial execution, which is done in the UK, in other European countries like Portugal, where in some cases they only take into the moment of payment to see if the payment was well performed, but it goes also to the commitment to the commitment to of the budget if it was done according to the legislation. We are building a certification model uh, for the entities with double certification, one from the administration and the other one regarding the conformity of the subjacent transactions from this budget, because it's and for us this is a great challenge, because SEMAG will not be able to do that in many ministries. It has to be this in a decentralized way, like defining the criteria, the materiality. So there are several challenges of auditing techniques to that we need to develop to understand how the United Kingdom do. Uh, so, for example, the United States doesn't do anything, but they have a analysis of due payments to be paid, and they have a compliance, financial compliance analysis that are always obligatory by law, and they check if the bodies are accomplishing it. So they make like a rate of maturity rate. So this is only scope that we could see as possible. So going back to the scope or no scope, because the idea is the object of one of the things that I understand as valuable is to see how the practice of the SAI is. Uh, we should not say how each SAI should do, but we have to understand what they are doing and evaluate the similarities they have and the differences we have from them, and then we see the possibilities of how we can work, be how we can do it, or how what we shouldn't do. The conversation is very good, but we need to start going to an end. But before that, I would like to talk to Heitor if Thiago has already wrapped up everything, or but Heitor is the CEMAC director in charge of the BGU financial audit. So, Heitor, can you talk a little bit about your perspective, please? Perfect. So first of all, I would like to thank the opportunity of being this event, because all the insights have and topics have been uh, of value. I believe that Alessandro, that I can add some contributions to Thiago's uh, contribution, because he has brought up some important topics regarding the budgetary audit. So this year was a very important year and good year to show us example, because the execution of the financial budgetary policies, we saw some things that were stopped because of budgetary content, and then we brought these questions to be treated in the turn, because one of the KPIs that we evaluate in our cycles of accounting cycles that we do annual basis is the budgetary balance. We discussed some hours for regarding these, like for example the providence, uh, if how we could take this into the our budget. So good part of what we have said here is going back to the financial audit that we have to do, especially because of the size of the union. So I saw all these topics here, and I would like also to talk a little bit about credibility, because it was one of the aspects that we have established one strategy to approach to the financing budget, um, and going to a convergency to the accountability we see that there are several situations uh, with the professional that's working, and you see that the person was impacting, like the person was sometimes the problem or the solution. So all these results of auditing um, doesn't work, doesn't serve for anything if the person doesn't do it well. So this moment now is a moment that we still have a long way on budget, but I think it's a moment to address the topic, to have a recurrent audit, systematic audit, just as we have done a financial audit every year. So I think that's the way, and it's going to be a challenge. I think credibility is the word, just as Thiago said, because that's the scope. The budgetary transactions will reflect that. So as far as we go onto these, taking away these problems in the budget, and we orientate the manager, um, less we have problems, and as less we do that, more we suffer with the alternatives that they are taking to escape the policies. So from there, it surges the need of systematic work to aggregate security and credibility in this information. So in the financial audit, in report with the object, we had some alternatives, and we have been updating these alternatives. And I think, Thiago, that it was a very good practice, if I'm not wrong. We have done something back then and have examined all the results, but we didn't accomplish all the goals we wanted, but we saw what we could do, and now we have a discussion going towards the process of uh, expenses. So this enhances the importance of and the results that have been achieved so far. And going to the financial audit, the in talking about the challenging object uh, of the public administration in the federal terms. So we see that the our strategy is always to evolve and year by year to have incremental growth, step by step. So these may be an alternative given the background that we have already mentioned here. How can we address this in the first moment? Are we going to segment everything or not? I mean, thanks to the financial audit, we have the ISO 600, so it can help us to have better controlling and policies. So I'm very glad to see this material being done and giving us a better horizon. Thiago has talked really well about the integration that has taken very good discussions to us of how we can treat this conformity part of these subjacent transactions and how they are basically caused by budgetary problems. So this is the importance for us to understand how we can avoid it. How we can format better the norms of financing audit to create better legitimacy for our results, and then uh, also from our behalf here in the financing audit, we have the total interest to contribute to discussions, and we see that the budget accomplishes the goal of controlling, but it should also contribute to taking decisions. I still think that we have a long way to go, and the handbook is will enlighten several topics that we have still to face and do. So these are my contributions, and this is the common point with the financial audit. And I think that is important to understand the scope or not scope, what is scope or what is not a scope, and we understand that uh, all the positions in the tribunal have like scarce, like few resources. So we understand that we should understand better how to relocate the resources. Thank you very much. Very important your historic and comment regarding the financial audit project. So let's go to the end. I would like to pass the word to the final considerations of Neemias, Arantia, Thiago.
I would like to thank your participation and all of you. Very valuable contribution from all of you. If Neemias or Arantian could not have all this contribution to the handbook, I'm sure that we're going to use that in our daily business. I would like to thank the presence of Dr. Rodrigo. We know that a lot of the objects, a lot of the works from the SEMAG, you have true interest in this subject of the budget credibility. I think you're going to have that. I thank you for your presence to follow our discussions. This is my participation, Neemias. Excellent. I would like to thank you all for your participation, the engagement. It was a very rich ideas to give an overview of the projects. Aranja can say more and the relevance of today's meeting. We have a starting point that were these preliminary discussions, and the team was involved. And initially, we made a draft that, from what I understand, what I conclude is a start point for the discussion instead of something that limits it. So we wrote, and to be put on the paper and see what you want to say, we can be more conclusive and reflect in a deeper way about the team. And now we have an on-site meeting, and now it's a review round that has lots of points to be put in the text. So I see that today's meeting is going to be contributions to all 4 chapters because of this possibility of the review of the text. Not only us, but also Arantia today can collect out inputs and information that's going to be useful, very rich, and it's about what we were discussing, and several things are innovation, are new start points to a deeper reflection. We are almost in the ending of the manual elaboration. I would like to thank you all, and we recorded the meeting so it make it easier. Thank you very much.
When I was taking notes. I will have to go through my notes, but also through the recording. For me, it's been really a very rich day. I really appreciate the contributions from everyone in the room. I think it's been very interesting, very stimulating, and it's going to provide a lot of material and a lot of observations to improve and to strengthen the drafts that we have. As Nehemiah said, we have produced a first draft of materials, and the review meeting was a key moment for the group to come together and discuss those first drafts and address some of the conceptual issues and some of the challenges also in terms of gathering additional information from Supreme Audit institutions and examples and practices. And now it's the moment to go back and try to strengthen those materials, addressing some of the gaps that we identified during the review meeting. And in that sense, I think this meeting was particularly timely. And I would like to thank TCU and Lucieni. I know that you have been the driving force to try to make it happen, and Alessandro and Nehemias, Roberto, and all the team for the effort and the organization and convening this meeting. For us, it's important not only in terms of strengthening the materials, providing all these inputs, but also as a way to enhance the ownership of the handbook and the product within Supreme Audit institutions. We think these internal discussions are very, very important in that regard. We would like to see the handbook really used by auditors in their work and perceived as something that is useful and that is valuable for the work they do. And in that sense, bringing together different minds, different people working in the same institution, I think is critical to have a solid and high quality handbook at the end. We think that also this kind of internal review is something that should happen in all the Supreme Audit institutions that are engaged in the project. And of course, we will also have an external, wider peer review, engaging members of the INTOSAI community, but also different experts working on budget issues, public financial management, and budget credibility. And that would happen later in the year before the finalization of the handbook. So in that sense, this has been a really timely meeting, and I would like to thank everyone for the patience, staying at the end, and also the discussions were becoming richer and richer when we were approaching 5 p.m. So really thank you for the effort, especially on a Friday. Thank you very much, and it's been really, really interesting, and I hope that we will be able also to engage you somehow in the process going forward.
E é claro que eu tinha que deixar de agradecer.
Of course, that I forgot to thank Arancha's presence, that make sure to be on site to follow in the discussion. Thank you very much, Arancha. I would like to thank first to be involved now in this discussion. I missed the time that I was in Semag. We have contact every week. Involve the colleagues. Arancha, thank you very much. And the presence of Rodrigo until the end. We are very honored, and we have a lot to thank. It was a very rich debate, very open, very technical, and treat about a subject that's very opportune, that has a social impact, economic impact, and political impact. The trust of society in the government depends on the budget credibility. We are living a very critical moment all over the world, an expectation related to the government that reflects in the fiscalization entities, and it's important for us to study and seek the best practices to improve the works that we do related to budget. And at the end, is almost the whole government. We are talking about the budget activity, the assets of union, but the budget is huge. We're talking about the government. And I told at the beginning, and I'm going to enforce Semag needs to leader in the TCO, because the subject needs to be in the sectorial units and the SAIs, if they have a unit like that, because it's very important, this kind of view. And remind here, Luciane, the budget week that had this goal to bring the sector areas to the budget discussion. And after the confusion of pedalada fiscais in 2015, some management come here that go after 2016. And what I said was, first seek controls, legal safety specialists that are going to assure legal safety in the process and to share taxes responsibility with the ministry. It's not only the finance ministry and the Ministry of Economy that's responsible for the budget. All of them, some countries evolved to have this responsibility to the managers of budget areas to create the tax responsibility conscience with the awareness of the public money, and this work makes a very good framework. So I'd like to congratulate the framework of this budget because it's current, it's opportune, and goes in the expectations that the society has related to the government and also the monitoring fiscalization entities. Thank you very much. Rodrigo, if you allow, I would like to pass to Roberto the final consideration, then Alexandre. I have I have to thank you because we have a very rich debate. You put some questions here. I have to we are in the stage to transform the ideas more abstract in a trustworthy product with quality. This is our concern of the last week. And from now on, we have more resources to help us in this task. Thank you all for your contribution. I'm going to break the protocol. I know that I'm not in the list, but if I present some problems, I'm going to give some suggestions. I saw that is in the budget credibility could be put an index that as I comment to enemies as being recorded, I'm going to register. These 5 teams are very quick. The predict inflation, a realism. RP inscription, if you every year have 7 billions every year in RP under registration of the expense and the re-estimatives of expenses, the group, the percentage of taxes benefits. I'm sorry that you were very far away from that, but if we seek the concept, if the concept's not well, everything doesn't work. Thank you, Joaquim. It's your considerations are all welcome. I would like to thank the invitation to be here, Neemias and Arantxa talked about the next space. IBP is very glad with this institutional effort and human research and the time that TCU is dedicated to this project. And I'm sure it's going to be very important to the other SAIs in the world that maybe don't have a debate like that. I thank you, the interpreters, so the community can follow the debates. And I hope to see you in November and the other moments that we are going to be in the making of the handbook. I would like to congratulate all the team involved in the making of the handbook draft. Semag, Alessandro, Neemias, Roberto, Luciene, Arentia, represent Andessa, Alexandre. It was a big pleasure to join this discussion. Everybody said that I was here from the beginning. It could not be different. It was so good from the beginning. The level was so good, but the discussion was so good, and there is no other option than stay here to have this learning, exchange idea, and from my part was very good. I would like to highlight the framework, something that Thiago brought, the credibility as an object of audit was a very happy option. The framework that's very relevant. It's a very important focus thinking about budget, and to highlight, as Luciane said, it's an aspect that was highlight of the government accounts, the discussion about the secret budget, RP9, that's very emphasized, and that shows the importance of this credibility issue. The challenge that the country is facing is that we can see in this kind of tool, budget tool, shows under our point of view the importance of this framework. I think that another countries are like that. So to congratulate the choices, their works, and to thank.